Folks, thank you for tuning in at home. MVU students, thanks for attending. Candidates, thanks for being here. This is the second debate in the MVU debate series. The candidates from Swanton and Sheldon were here this morning, and the candidates for the Senate are going to be with Mr. Napolitano's class this afternoon. We are lucky enough to have Linda Collins and Ms. Fagard from, if I mispronounce your name, I apologize, from the Highgate, Franklin, Berkshire, Richford district. And they're good enough here to be here and answer some questions for us, and maybe some questions from you guys as well. Just a little bit of a note about how the format for this is going to go. I'm the moderator, and we'll be asking most of the questions. I do want to give the two of you an opening statement, or a time for an opening statement. And then we will probably be finishing up about an hour from now, just to let you know. At the end of the debate, or at the end of the session, you'll also have some time for a brief closing statement too. Okay? So to open things up, would both candidates like to take a moment to introduce yourselves and maybe offer a statement as to why you are running?
Sorry, me?
Go ahead.
My name is Linda Collins. I taught school in Enosburg, 12th grade English for 35 years. Just retired. I'm chairman of the Richford Select Board, so I know quite a bit about municipal law. Obviously, education is one of the forefront issues with me. I'm on the Notch Board of Directors, which is affordable health care. And I think with all the experience I've had in various areas that it's time for me to move on and try to do things on the state level.
My name is Sharon Fagard. I came to Vermont 20 years ago. I was an Air Force brat, and I married an active duty military member. And so I've traveled all over the world and all over the United States, and I've seen what government looks like and what communities look like under different models. I never thought I would run for office, but I took a class to learn how to be a good volunteer for a candidate I'd want to support, and that candidate didn't show up. And I feel it's really important. It's really important to serve our communities and make sure people who work hard and are competent fill those seats. Both of our incumbents are retired, and I will say that at that time Linda had not yet entered the race. So.
Could you please come to the front desk? Stephen Burrich, front desk.
Did that cut you off, or was there anything else you wanted to say?
Fine.
Okay. So the students should be aware that there are also three other candidates who, for whatever reasons, weren't able to show up today: Josh Aldrich, Shane Rhodes, and Daniel Nadeau. Just a real quick question. I think party affiliation matters a lot less today. I think party affiliation matters a lot less on local politics, local elections. Would both of you mind stating which political party you're running from?
I'm running as an independent. I have thought about running for a while. This year, the two people that served you are retiring. But I signed someone else's petition, so I felt like I shouldn't run against him. And then he didn't turn the petition in until it was too late for me to get one together. So I got calls from the Democrats and the Republicans asking me to run. And I said, well, it must be too late. And they said, no, you can run as an independent. So yes, I probably would have run as a very conservative Democrat. However, I'm kind of glad I'm an independent right now. I just think that it's time people started trying to get along a little bit, and maybe I can do that if I can look at both sides of it. And by the way, there are two slots for this position. We're not like fighting each other here. You can vote for two.
I am running as a Democrat. I'm independently minded. I have already voted. I did not vote straight party line. I vote for the person, not the party. And what has really impressed me about Vermont, and I've knocked on almost 1,000, I've talked to almost 1,000 people knocking on their doors. And most people like myself are thoughtful that way. If you have an idea who's running, you know their work ethic, their integrity, how bright they are or not. then you can choose who you think will serve best. And Vermont is unusual that way. I'm running as a Democrat. I'm running but I'm bringing my common sense with me.
So, first question, as a teacher, I have to go out of my way to try to make sure that I'm choosing sources which are both on the right and on the left in class, obviously with the idea of narrowing in on the facts. Would you mind sharing with the viewers at home and the students here, what are the news sources that you tend to watch or read at home?
I watch the mainstream news, NBC, CBS. I watch CN. Occasionally I'll turn over to, can't think of it right now, Fox, and I read the newspaper every day. And I was a former newspaper reporter. I did that. I worked for the Free Press for many years, and I was a news director at, you don't remember it, but there was a radio station in St. Albans called WTSN. And so I spent a lot of time over the years reading about and writing about politics.
Well, I don't watch a lot of news. I read a lot more news, and but my sources are pretty mainstream. Sometimes I try to get multiple sources, everything from the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post, the New York Times, and our local papers, Vermont Digger, Burlington Free Press, 7 Days, the Courier and the Messenger, and part of that is because I'm really trying to focus on local issues. It's incumbent upon us to know what's going on in our state, and I have my background is science. I have a degree in biology, and I think that facts, being able to make sure that you can verify your information is really important, and anything too far to the left or too far to the right becomes more creative than factual.
So there are several prepared questions that the candidates have taken a look at. I do want to encourage the students to to ask any questions that are either on the list or ones that you might have. I'll give a second now if anybody wants to.
So we can ask questions from those that are on the
Sure.
All right. Do you believe President Trump sets a positive tone for American political discussions?
I don't think there's a positive tone right now in politics at all. I blame both sides. I don't like some of the things he says about people. But you got to remember to respect the office of the presidency. And I plan to run a fairly mild campaign. I'm not going to, at least not in public, I'm not going to call anybody any names.
You'll appreciate that.
Yeah. I think that one of the reasons why young people are not as engaged in politics as I was when I turned 18, it was presidential election year and I was excited to vote, is that you have grown up in endless wars. You have grown up watching the economy pretty much abandon the middle class, and higher education is out of reach for a lot of people, and you have also grown up in a time where politics at the national level has become a lot more like professional wrestling, where there's so much showmanship, and I really want to keep the conversations on topic, what we can do here and now, and not be distracted by the performance at the national level.
So if I can actually offer a follow-up that is kind of a combination of both questions. Can you offer a reaction to when the president calls the press the enemy of the American people?
Well, I think freedom of the press is one of our rights, and it's very important. And I don't know if he really believes that or not, or if he uses it, but as a former newspaper reporter, I took great pride in making sure that everything I wrote was correct. I don't think I ever had to print a retraction in 10 years. So I think that we need to keep our press strong because it makes our country strong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Courier and the Messenger every week ask candidates questions during this campaign season. And then they print our answers in our own words. And that is an example of supporting the democratic process. The press is valuable. It should serve the public. It should not serve the state. And journalists in dictatorships are being murdered. They're being suppressed and they are being murdered. The free press is essential to people knowing what's going on. And it's essential to democracy.
Thank you. I promise that the questions won't all be about the president or the national discourse.
That's a good idea.
But I think some of those questions do need to be asked because they do reveal individual candidates' bias one way or the other.
The hard ones the other way.
Right.
So let's start with the question which might be of interest to some of the students here, but it also may be one that some are not too concerned about. How do you feel about Vermont's current recreational marijuana law?
You want me to go first on this one?
Sure.
So I really liked it when they decriminalized it. I didn't think it made a lot of sense to spend taxpayer dollars to incarcerate people for having marijuana when instead you could find somebody a little bit of money and make a little money for the state. The legalization is complicated for a couple reasons. My concerns are we don't have a roadside test like we do for alcohol consumption. So if somebody is inebriated on marijuana and they get pulled over, there's no way for police officers to know. And when somebody drives under the influence, they are no longer just impacting their own lives, they're risking other people's lives. And I have a real problem with that. The other thing is that it is in direct conflict with federal law. Though federal law does treat marijuana as the same class of substance as heroin, which I think is not a reasonable or logical thing. In fact, some people who are struggling with opiate addiction do wean themselves from opiates and rely on marijuana for that. I think that I'm glad that it has not been commercialized. I'm glad they're not doing what Canada has just done, which is like, okay, now we're going to make a bunch of money, and a bunch of wealthy business investors are going to make money off of what everyone else has been getting arrested for. I think it's a messy topic. The reality is that mind-altering chemicals alter your mind. And prohibition, flat-out prohibition, has not been effective. We saw what that did with alcohol, and all it did was destroy the small breweries and give rise to the mob. But yeah, it's complicated. Humans are messy. Addiction has been something that people have struggled with since the beginning of humanity. That's my answer.
Yeah, I agree in part. I don't want to see any young people going to jail and having their lives ruined because they had a little pot. My big concern are opioids because I've already lost a sister. It's hard for me to talk about. So I know that it all started with pot, even though you know that's not the next step necessarily for a lot of people, but for a lot of people it is. And I think we need to concentrate on helping the addicts, not punishing them. Of course, I'm getting into opioids now. You asked me about marijuana. After hearing all the testimony in Montpelier that they gave, I probably would have voted no. Just to save you a few more years of being chemical free or pot free. No, it's a tough one, like she said.
Any follow-ups from the students on that?
Go ahead.
Come on, kids. I know you have questions.
Yeah.
Well, I also want to make sure that I'm not giving the perception that the MVU students only have issues of drinking or,
Oh, I
or
do.
marijuana.
Of course
on
not.
the
Of
mind.
course not. Of course not.
That's just majority.
That's it. Yeah. Well, I taught school for 35 years. I saw the difference when kids smoked pot and came to school as to nowadays when they're coming to school with what I call the angry drugs. And, you ask them to hand you a paper and they're up in your face like, and you've all seen it in your classrooms. So there's been a big change in that, we're back in the 60s just smoking pot, it's a whole different lifestyle than what's going on now.
Well, and what I think is important to consider is the phrase, not your grandfather's weed. because
It isn't.
Within the years with how the chronic drug has become.
You got that right, and they're lacing it with all kinds of stuff. It's not backyard weed anymore. No, exactly.
Stuff that's coming from Montreal and passing through.
You got it.
and
You got it.
Be really careful.
Exactly.
Which is
And
why I don't pose the question. Do you think cannabis sales should be state controlled? Because as it stands, it's legal to own stuff, grow plants, you
Right.
can, but you would still have to say, just pick up some cannabis.
right.
And however, the government wants to oppress black market sales. What are your stances on that? How do you think we can combat that?
I'm looking at it like, it's a way for them to make money in the state. Okay, everybody wants money. But where are they going to put that money? If they wanted to put it back into resources to help the people that go beyond the pot, I might be more interested. But just to make money or to regulate it, they don't even have anything in place yet. I have truck drivers because I'm chairman of the select board. They're still subject to pot tests every month or so. What's going to happen there? Are they going to say, well, it's legal now, or are they going to? What kind of laws? They needed to get some things in place, I think, before they went totally. And they need to think about it a little more and have some stuff in place instead of now saying, should we regulate it now? Well, they should have thought of that. And that's my opinion.
And like you said, it is very messy. There's tons of things we have to consider. That's where, when you mentioned prohibition.
Right.
We had alcohol in our society beforehand. So
Right.
we already had systems
Then they took it
in place
away.
on who could drink it, who couldn't drink it. As with marijuana, it's legal for most of the shelf life.
Right. It's something you can't relate to, and it's not pot, but it's the same thing. The drinking age. What do you think about the drinking age? Back when I was your age, we were like, we can go to Vietnam, we should be able to drink. That was the big thing. So when I turned 21, they changed it to 18, and so I really didn't care anymore. But then when I started to teach school, and it was still 18, and the kids were coming to school drunk, hungover, not drunk maybe, but hungover. Then I was like, wait a minute, maybe this shouldn't happen. Then they changed it back to 21 again. So there's a thing that's been back and forth. And I don't know if they figured out which is the best. I think the same thing's going to go on with the pot. I think we may run into some problems later on, and
Yeah.
it remains to be seen to me.
Ms. Regard, did you want to comment as well?
You mentioned the age of legal drinking, and the human brain doesn't really finish developing until you're about in your mid-20s. When my kids were going into 7th grade, because 7th grade was next to the building, 7th and 8th were next to the high school kids, I called it the sex, drugs, and rock and roll conversation with them, because parents really should talk to their kids about the hard things, the difficult topics, and basically, mind-altering chemicals alter your mind. The sooner you start using those mind-altering chemicals, the more your brain development is shaped by that use. So if somebody's 70 years old and they take a hit off a joint for the first time or have a drink for the first time, it's not going to have near the same impact it is if somebody's 18 or 16 or 12. Some people start when they're 12. So I do think 21 is a very reasonable age. And I know that some people say, well, the age of majority, you should be able to do everything all at once. It's like, well, that's
Ease into it.
oversimplified. Oversimplified. Sure, you can serve in our military, but how about you keep your brain as clear as possible for as long as possible?
Any follow-ups to that? Okay. Kind of switching topics, talking about the Franklin County economy and agriculture. The number of farms in Franklin County and the number of dairy farms in the state of Vermont continues to decline. And with the understanding that a lot of the support for farms comes from the federal government. Is that an area of the economy that is so much in decline that we should let the free market run its free course?
Well, I've talked to several farmers, and some of them say, keep the government out of it, that's the problem. But I will tell you that I don't know a lot about farming. It's one of my issues that I want to work on, and I have been I'm endorsed by at least 3 farmers. They're working on it. They've got a coalition. They're working on it. They want stronger voice in Washington. They want our ag commissioner to get in there and start fighting for Vermont, because they're dumping milk in. How many of you are farmers? Any of you? You are? Yeah. And, they are definitely working on it, and I think the state of Vermont should give them as much support as they can, because remember, it's not just if farms go out of business, you got truck drivers going out of business, you got grain stores, you got equipment that they buy. It's not just, we won't have a farmer, we won't have a lot of jobs. And so we really should try to support them. We should support all business, and they're a business.
The Farm Bill and milk prices are federal issues. The state has, we're a long history of agriculture. It wasn't always dairy, but it's been dairy for a long time now. I know that there are things we can do to support our dairy farmers, but I think the free market is really devastating them. I'm actually curious to see what's going to happen. Supposedly there'll be a little bit more access to the Canadian market for our dairy farmers. The Canadian market does not really have much in the way of producing organic milk, and that might be a niche that we can move into, in part because their farmers are doing great. Their average herd size is 60 to 80, and it's hard to get into it because nobody wants to get out of it. And why would they do what they need to get organic certified when they're doing well? They don't want to take time off. They don't want to increase their costs for the grain, which costs twice as much, for however long, a year, before they can start charging organic prices. So I'm hoping that both our organic and our commercial dairy can benefit by the new North American, the U.S., Canadian, Mexican trade agreement. I view food security as a national security issue. If you don't have farms, you don't have food. If there's some kind of systemic collapse for any reason and nobody near you is producing food, what are you going to eat? And we produce an awful lot of milk, a lot more than anybody here drinks. But we do need to support our farmers. I don't know how it's going to shake out, and I don't know what we can do at the state level beyond a few things that will be kind of Band-Aids.
If I can ask a follow-up to that question that relates to farmers and a national issue that the president has focused in on a lot, illegal immigration. Again, even though that is more of a federal issue, but it does hit some of these guys because of illegal workers, illegal immigrants working on Vermont farms. Should local law enforcement or state law enforcement be working with federal law enforcement to go after farms that employ illegal workers?
You want me to take it first?
Sure.
So there's a line between federal and state law. One of the people I talked to works in Border Patrol. He wanted to know what I thought, and I said, well, you're doing your job. You work for the federal government. That's not really going to be in my realm of influence if I win. And I know that state and federal law enforcement back each other up for safety purposes. And they're hiring undocumented workers, sometimes documented workers, because they work for a lot less money. And that's one of the things that allows them to survive as a farm. Would it be great if our dairy farmers were making 30 a hundredweight so that they could hire people who are from here to work? That'd be great. I don't think it's an issue for us. We're not Texas, where a lot of our Border Patrol people come from, and where I lived for a long time. I don't see it's an issue, and I think that our state law enforcement can focus on the other things that need a lot more attention that are impacting our communities in a much bigger way.
I agree. I don't think it's a big issue for us, and I think if you talk to the farmers, they might tell you they can't find anybody to work. Even at a higher wage, that there just aren't people that want to work on farms anymore or won't. And maybe our officials, since we are a small state, could maybe work to have some undocumented people to help them through the process of getting documented, so they would be legal. Because I'm going to tell you, every student I ever taught that came here, they were born here, but their parents came as farm workers, did very well in school, were very, into sports, into grades, into college, into whatever, being very nice kids. So, there's a really good group there. And if we could help them become citizens, the parents, it might help us all.
I want to take a break from my questioning and ask if there's any questions from the students. Rich?
So, do you think that some of the gun laws that were recently passed are a little too far? Like the age and when you can buy a gun, or magazine capacity, etc.?
You can take it, because I
So
partially
you're
agree with
speaking
you.
specifically to S55? Because there was the extreme risk bill, which said if you're planning to do harm, you don't get to have guns for 6 months, and we'll reevaluate you then. There's the domestic violence bill and then S55. So in a family, a hunting family, if you want to buy a rifle before you're 21, you're 18, you've already taken the hunter safety course, right? You can buy a rifle when you're 18. It doesn't stop you. If you've had safety training either in law enforcement, serving in the military, or you've taken the hunter safety course, you can buy a rifle. And even if you haven't, your parents or your grandparents or a sibling can gift you a rifle. It doesn't prevent that. My kids only did target practice probably about 5 times growing up. And when I thought about the difference between, they're 21 and 22 now, my boys. The difference between who they are today and who they were when they were 18, I would want them to have a safety training if they were going to buy a rifle. And I'd help them buy that rifle afterwards or buy it for them, but I would want them to understand things like backdrop. I mean, your backstop. You don't want somebody who's completely ignorant out there who doesn't know some of the basic safety issues. I don't have a problem with that piece of S55 at all. Some of the things, I've read the law, and some of the things I do have an issue with are, the way they define immediate family gifting. Like, I don't have siblings, so if I wanted to gift my hunting rifle, I can't gift a hunting rifle to a niece or a nephew because that's not considered immediate family. Or it's not clear if I'm at the firing range and I want to try one of my friend's firearms. That might be illegal. It touches on some. It pushes against some rights.
But in general, you're in favor of S55?
S55, banning bump stocks, I fully support. The raising the age and providing those exemptions for folks who've had safety training, I fully support. I have some pushback about magazine clip size. For instance, if, I go knock on doors frequently by myself. And if I felt like I needed to carry a piece because I'm a woman and I'm, it's the world we live in, I would maybe have to get a special magazine because, a Glock is going to be 17 or 18 rounds, not 15. And I think it was arbitrary. It's completely unenforceable. I understand where they were coming from. I appreciate that. But I think it was a gesture law that does no good and is completely unenforceable. And it's really questionable about how constitutional it is.
I think the Attorney General also voiced some concerns during testimony about that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Ms. Collins?
I agree. I think one of the things, I'll go a different route on this, that bothers me is that if you want to enforce we got to face the reality, there are a lot of mass shootings now that we didn't have when we were younger. And so we have to protect everybody. We have to protect the capable gun owners. But the problem to me seems to be that if anybody wants to talk about it, this side says, no, you're trying to take our rights away, and this side says, oh, they won't come and sit down at the table and agree. Years ago, Missisquoi got a resource officer. You still have one here? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to get one in Enosburg. Well, you wouldn't believe the protest because this guy was going to have a gun. And now it's almost like we're glad, everybody's glad they have him, but there was a huge protest about it. We were going to have our OTC in school, and there was a huge protest about it. And it's turned out to be one of the best programs we have. Do you have that here, our OTC? No, with the uniforms, you don't.
Recruiters are allowed to come in
Right.
at certain times,
But this
not
is an
specific-
actual
right.
program at school. The kids dress up once a week and they go to drills, and it's been a great thing for respect. And so, if they just sit down and talk a little bit, I think people would maybe see, I want my kid to be safe in school, but I want to have my gun rights too. And we need to talk about it and look at this, like you say, unenforceable part of the law.
Just so you guys are aware, we're over half done now. So even though you're on the hot seat, time does go.
Yes, it does.
So I have a question from the list, which I think is very important as far as Vermont's perception by other states, and also about the environment. Over the summer, to my knowledge, there were at least 3 or 4 instances where, because of heavy downpours, the infrastructure that we currently have in place failed, and raw sewage ran into the lake.
Oh, yes.
It's happened here, I believe, in St. Albans, but it definitely happened down in the Chittenden County area more than once. Not that the two of you can solve the issue, but if the issue required raising taxes, is that something you would consider raising taxes to support?
Okay, go ahead.
So, in 1972, Vermont passed the bottle bill, and that put a little deposit on every beer or soda that people bought. And until this session, there was something going on. So not every single bottle or can gets returned and has that deposit claimed. So millions of dollars a year is left in the coffers, right? Anybody here have any idea what's been happening to that money all these decades? Anybody want to guess? And this is an example of something that I hold in very low regard. Every single year, that money's been gifted back to the bottling industry. So Coke, Budweiser, they're making a killing. They basically turned it into a tax to pay industry.
Because they need more money, right?
And they are doing
You got it.
really well without that gift. Now, this year, finally, in May, signed into law. That's no longer going to happen starting next year. That money's going to be used to clean up our waters. That's tens of millions of dollars that could have been used
For 50 years.
for 50 years. So how much? It didn't used to be quite as much as it is today. So what, 70, 80 million dollars? What could we have
Bottles
done?
were always a nickel.
Yeah, what could we have
50
done
years.
with that money? And I'm wondering, are there other places where somebody made a backroom deal favor to their buddy and it didn't get fixed for decades? That's really what I want to look for. Raising taxes is something that this particular part of Vermont, I don't think they can handle. I've talked to too many people who are not getting medical care they need because they are not getting by and they're working over 40 hours a week. I am loath to consider raising taxes, but I am very happy to look for ways to eliminate waste like that. That's just flagrant waste born of corruption.
I think we agree that if this money goes toward cleaning up the water, at least right now, there wouldn't have to be any taxes raised for this. This would be a really good start at cleaning up. And like you say, look for some other things that are already in existence. But this is a lot of money. So it's going to definitely make a difference. And they're starting to do some water quality things over at Lake Carmi. It's a much smaller lake, obviously, but everybody's aware of it now. So I think, it took 100 years to have all this raw sewage going into the lake. So it's going to take a little while to get it out, unfortunately.
The opportunity from for questions from the students? So a couple of weeks ago, a group of scientists from the UN came out with a report saying that the fossil fuel use of our society is partially linked to climate change. The report also said that if we are going to stave off the effects of abrupt climate change, we've got maybe 20 or 30 years left. The solutions that some people have proposed are carbon taxes and less use of energy. I guess the first question would be, do you put, how much faith do you put in that report, or is it alarmist?
I totally agree that, I know there are weather patterns over the years, but I've believed in this since the beginning. And look what we're doing. Obviously, we're hurting something. We're polluting all the time. So yes, I take it very seriously. That was your question.
So, my background is in biology. I've been following the data, the giant deep samples of Arctic ice, and our carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions are absolutely contributing to a large shift in our climate. I'm 49 years old. I've been watching the climate change. My kids are now in Arizona. I spent some time on Luke Air Force Base there. It didn't used to be 120 degrees there. It is changing. And one of the models they have for Vermont is drought. One of the climate models that I've heard from a hydro specialist is that we're going to have a drier place. Well, how many gallons does a dairy cow drink every day? Something like 35 gallons? Yeah. And our forests are referred to as the asbestos forest because they don't burn. If we turn to drought, our forests absolutely will burn. It is a real issue. That said, I don't support a carbon tax. One reason is that while it was supposed to replace a sales tax, it was really complicated and convoluted. And when you make law that you cannot cleanly track the process of getting from point A to point B, and there are multiple layers, those are each an opportunity for ineptitude or corruption or something to go wrong. A sales tax is very clean. We do need to provide initiatives for being more conservative with our energy. The weatherization program saves an awful lot of heating fuel and firewood every year. And we've cut back our weatherization under this current administration. We should have a really good weatherization program, and we should offer opportunities. If we're moving into drought, one of the things that LA did when California hit their drought 20 years ago, they gave away low flow toilets, and it made a huge difference. Instead of flushing 4.5 gallons down, they were flushing 1.5 gallons down. So I think we need to make sure that we support people making good decisions and help people. It's not political. It shouldn't be political. This is science. The nice thing about science is when new information comes out, you upgrade. You don't just hold on to some dogma. You say, oh, well, we were wrong. Actually, now we understand this better, and we move forward. It's not politics. This is just science.
If the circumstances arose where there was an initiative to raise the gas tax to discourage use, could you see yourself supporting that?
No, I don't. There are too many people struggling to get by who have to commute to work. No.
And we're out in the boondocks where you have to drive a lot more than some people do, and we don't have mass transit. So it would be a hardship for us.
What do you think of other green projects that have been proposed in Franklin County, specifically Swanton Wind, which has come to a halt, or support for the solar industry, which has also been a national issue, but we do have our fair share of small solar arrays here in Franklin County?
We do.
One of the tricks with wind energy, just like hydro, is wherever you have electricity being generated off of motion, you have friction, so there's resistance. It's not as effective as solar. I fully support solar. I also fully support keeping those interests local. I don't want big companies coming up from Massachusetts and installing these and then using all that for themselves. I think that any electric generation projects here should serve Vermonters. And specific to that wind project, I'd rather see us go solar for a number of reasons, both for the communities that are around them as well as some of the impacts.
Ms. Collins?
I agree. I agree. I don't know a lot about the wind power. I know that's a very controversial topic and people don't want it in their towns, but solar is becoming more and more, and there are a lot of local companies right here in Franklin County, so hopefully that's the way we'll go.
So another national issue which has some impact here in Vermont, Brett Kavanaugh was just confirmed to the Vermont Supreme Court. And even though that doesn't have any specific bearing as far as legislation here in the state, there are a lot of people that are speculating that there may be changes to Roe versus Wade. I'm curious what your thoughts about not the Kavanaugh situation, but about the potential changes to Roe versus Wade might be.
Can we get some clarification about that situation?
Right.
So,
And that was the U.S. Supreme Court, not the Vermont Supreme Court.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the Roe versus Wade decision is essentially the decision which made abortion legal in the United States. Vermont typically has been a state which embraces Roe versus Wade. There are a number of other states which have attempted to narrow the scope of Roe versus Wade so that if a young woman gets pregnant, the parents have to be notified. If a young woman gets pregnant, the parents might have to. The parents might have a say. There have been some efforts to restrict access to late-term abortions, even though the mother's health might be at risk. There's also a law in some states that requires a young woman to see an ultrasound of the fetus before the abortion is before she goes through with the abortion. So even though it's a national issue, Vermont may have to abide by something that the Supreme Court comes up with. Do you have any concerns about Roe versus Wade, or would you like to see Roe versus Wade changed?
Another tough one. I think that people are misinformed when they think it's an easy choice to have an abortion, and that people are just, I really think that women should decide for themselves what they're going to do. But what I really would like to see is contraceptives just available to anybody who needs them, and then we would probably cut down a little bit on abortions. I mean, I've taught school long enough to know about sexual abuse and pregnancies, and it's a hard topic, but I think women should choose for themselves, and I'll stick by that. But I would like to see, some, as I just said, contraception available to kids and anybody who needs it, which might go against some people's religion, probably mine, but it might prevent some heartache, and it's not an easy decision.
Ms. Vergard?
So Roe versus Wade says two things. It says you cannot force a woman to have an abortion, and it says you cannot force a woman to not have an abortion. And in some states, there's only one clinic now, and poor women have to travel, somehow come up with the money to travel great distances to access it. Not surprisingly, these are the same states where women do not have access to accurate information about reproduction or easy access to reliable long-term birth control at, free of cost. If we want to reduce the number of abortions that are happening, which I think is a great idea, the way to do it, as Linda said, is through access to birth control, but also information. If people don't have accurate information, and I am thinking in particular of some deep South states where they're not given any information growing up and in school other than abstinence, and they are shamed deeply if they there's a reason why there are over 7 billion humans on the planet. Over half of the pregnancies are unplanned. People engage in sexual activity. This is not new news. We need accurate sex education We need access to birth control. And I am concerned about Roe v. Wade being overturned, because abortion didn't just start when Roe v. Wade happened. It's been going on for a long time. My grandmother, as a young woman, administered the ether when her father, who was a doctor in very poor rural Missouri, where there were sharecroppers. You think the dairy farmers here are poor? Sharecroppers often had nothing but a shack with a table in it, no other furniture. They had a bunch of kids already. They were all skinny because they were all slowly starving. And mom was pregnant again. And she would administer a self-abortion, and the fetus would be dead and poisoning her because she now had an infection. And no doctors would help these women. And they were willing to orphan children because they were judging a woman for having attempted abortion. And my great-grandfather and my grandmother would perform a D&C to remove the decaying body from that woman so she could survive and continue to take care of her family. I don't think we need to go back to those days.
So to press you on this, and I think I probably know the answer, if there was an initiative in Vermont for parental notification, how would you vote?
I would vote against it, not because I don't think that there are parents who care and want the best for their children, but because there is too much at stake for a young woman, especially if she comes from a household where there is sex abuse. And nobody makes the choice easily. I would not restrict that any more than I would try to say only the first 6 weeks or the other restrictions. A woman has to live with the decisions she makes for the rest of her life. She makes it between herself and her God and herself and her doctor.
Ms. Collins?
I agree. Of course, there's a difference between an 18-year-old girl getting pregnant and a 12-year-old girl getting pregnant. And I think parents probably feel that that is a child, their baby, that they want to be notified of anything that happens to that child, including an abortion. So that's a tough one. I don't know. I agree. There's just so many different circumstances. I mean, you could have very caring parents that would be fine and not fine with it, but help you out, and you could have people that punished you for it. So it's a hard one, but I would probably stick with the fact that no parental notification. Just from being in the field of education for so many years, I've seen a lot.
Okay. Just to keep you guys apprised of the timing, it is about 7 after 12. We probably have time for maybe 2 more questions and then closing statements, and then we'll probably wrap up around 12:20 or so. So I was shocked when this issue came up in the 2016 presidential election, when I believe it was Marco Rubio, and then I think Trump also mentioned that he would consider not only a border wall for the southern border, but they would consider a border wall for the northern border. I'm curious, since we are just 6 miles from the northern border, what is your view of that proposal? Even though it's not in the national discourse right now, it could be again.
Go ahead. Okay. Let me ask you this. We built a wall along the Canadian border. Who would we be keeping out? The Canadians? I don't think they're in a hurry to come down here and stay. And if they did, I would assume we'd welcome them. If it's immigrants from other countries coming through Canada, they'd probably be perfectly fine in Canada. I can't see that this is an issue up here. We have pretty good border security. We don't seem to have a problem. So I don't know about the states in the West, but I've never heard of a big problem with the Canadian border, so I don't even know why it would be a viable alternative. We have the electronic border now. I can't even go to the cemetery in East Richford without a Border Patrol agent coming down and asking me what I'm doing there. So I think we're pretty well covered here. I don't think it's a problem.
This is not a problem. They are very effectively managing our border without a wall. This is not Texas or Arizona where you have a large influx of undocumented people crossing, or no, it doesn't make any sense. It would be very expensive. Maintenance would be expensive. You know, we're not down in the desert. A bunch of trees are going to grow up around it, and then all you need is a ladder and a rope, and you're over the wall. We're doing a really good job with our cameras and surveillance. You know, we have adequate coverage here.
Thank you. So, any other questions potentially from the students in the back?
What are your thoughts on billboards during the state of Vermont?
No, they're ugly. Period. Billboards in Vermont, they distract from your driving. We're known for our scenery. We're known, tourists come here, they don't want to look at billboards, I don't think. You know, cover our maple trees and all of our other fields and stuff, our cows. I say no.
And you know, do I support local businesses advertising? Yes. And we have those little signs off the roads, the brown ones. I would be okay with those signs being slightly larger and maybe a color other than brown. But to have gigantic 20-foot tall, 60 feet wide billboards, no way.
What would happen during hunting season to those billboards? Can you imagine? Be full of holes, right?
Any other questions?
I thought you had one.
So, to go to an issue which definitely affects a lot of us. I have family members who are going through this. I think a lot of the students probably have family members who are going through this as well. The meth, cocaine, heroin, opioid situation. Let me word it in a way which I don't think is too difficult. Is it possible for government to come up with a solution to those addiction issues?
If there was a solution, people would be using it. It's come upon us so fast that I think it's going to take a little time. But we need to be offering help and rehab. I've said this before today, not throwing kids in jail with hardened criminals when what they need is a lot of them want to get off opioids. We can't go for a 28-day program and expect, oh, bingo, it's going to be over. So we need some longer, serious counseling and help. There's a great one in Swanton. I don't know if any of you heard of it. I think it's New Day. It's at the Swanton. Yeah. They just put it in this notch, and then it's a program where you'd have to be gone through rehab, but it's a continuation of you need a doctor, you need a dentist, you need a job, you need to come in and be counseled. It's the whole person program, which we need more of. You can't just throw somebody in jail and let them go through all their pain and agony, and then throw them back out on the street again, because everybody's standing there waiting for them to come out. And we all know that. It's everywhere. You have to be a pretty tough person around here to say no. And so I think a lot more programs like that is what we need in Vermont.
Yeah.
And New Hampshire and New England and wherever.
Franklin County is particularly hard hit with the opiate crisis, and it's also, I think the most economically challenged, especially our district. That's not an accident. A lot of times, hopelessness is a key ingredient in addiction, whether it's somebody making a choice because they don't feel like they have anything to lose. It's at some point we are going to find the handful of genes that make somebody particularly susceptible to addiction. And even if you aren't particularly susceptible to addiction, some of these drugs are so addictive they're going to get you anyway. I volunteer on the Richford Restorative Justice Panel, which is an alternative to incarceration and helps people move forward. And I see it not just with opioids, but with DUIs, and addiction has been a struggle since humanity began. And the problem is that we've become really good at making chemicals that are very addictive. And we're going to have to treat people like humans you know, and do our best. The problem's not going to go away, but I think we can handle it better than we have been. And one of the things we need to do is remove some of the shame around it. Let people be honest without being shamed about what's going on. Not only addicts, but people who are struggling with mental health issues, or people who are struggling with what's going on at home. I think we need someone to talk to. We need to have resources. Yeah, it's a hard topic.
It's a hard topic. Sorry to make it even more hard. Would either of you support clinics where addicts would have access to needles or the drug they are addicted to?
I would support a clean needle program. That's a clear money saver for taxpayers. They are not spreading hepatitis C or HIV or some of the other very serious illnesses that are spread by dirty needles. Safe injection sites are in direct conflict with federal law. What I would suggest instead of safe injection sites is available same-day treatment, where, you know, when somebody has a moment, they are able to get themselves somewhere and say, I need help. They shouldn't have to wait for 2 weeks to get that help. Somebody should be able to get them in and get them on a maintenance program right away, same-day treatment.
I agree. Pretty much, yeah. Not just randomly, but you'd have to have a program along with it,
Yep.
with heavy counseling.
Yep.
Any final questions from the students? Robert?
I can add that into the statement. I have family members who suffered at the hands of the opioid crisis, land themselves up in jail, stolen from homes. I really appreciate the idea of treating these people like they're moving around and coming.
I'm with you. I've got one too.
So that,
Another.
sorry.
Should people in our correctional facilities and prisons have the right to vote?
Many of the people in prisons right now have not been convicted of a crime. They're there waiting and whatever, so I think they should have their rights. If they've served their time and they've paid their debt to society, if you want to call it that, I think they should. Probably a capital crime, murder or whatever, if they're convicted and they're in jail, probably not, in my opinion. But I think, yes, they should have their rights to vote.
There's another group of people in prison who've served their term, but they don't have housing. And in Vermont, if you don't have a place to live lined up, they don't let you out until you get that place. And it's probably really hard to find somewhere to live when you're in prison, so they're stuck. And by the way, it costs $55,000 to maintain incarcerate a male inmate in Vermont, and $75,000 to keep a woman incarcerated in Vermont. So that's a really expensive way to do it. And so what Linda said, I agree with, as well as those who've served their term but are still in prison because they haven't found a home to go to.
They're not convicted.
Yeah.
You lose all your rights, you know.
Any other questions?
Could ask questions about us. We're human.
So
Ask us after, too.
to finish up, Election Day is 2 weeks away.
Yes.
You have some potential voters in the room, and their moms or dads or guardians may be watching this later on. In your closing statement, why should people consider voting for you?
I think I have the experience in the various areas that I can, and I spent my career listening to people's problems and listening to people's ideas, and I'm not afraid to speak up. So I wish you'd vote for me if you can. Wish you'd just get out and vote.
Yeah.
I think you young people need to get out there because they keep telling you you're the future. Well, it's true, and you can't complain if you don't vote, and it does count. And in a small town like this, one vote makes a difference. You could have an election go one vote, and then you say, why didn't I get out there? I don't want that person. So just think about it, and run for office.
Yeah.
He did when he was in college.
I think voting is incredibly important. People have fought and died for the right to vote and for their vote to mean something. And as Linda said, you know, on a local level, your vote really does matter. Elections are won and lost by less than 20 votes. And different people run for office for different reasons. Some people are very personally ambitious for themselves instead of feeling like they want to serve their communities and make life better for the people who are their neighbors in their district. And I think voting is really important. I also think researching your candidates is really important. And I know in this race, for those of you who will be able to vote, you met two of us today. I have a website where I'm putting all 5 of our answers to the questions that the Courier and the Messenger ask every week. I'm also putting links to the Northwest Access TV forums so that if you are going to vote, you can learn who people are and get an idea of, okay, so maybe they're the party I prefer, but are they capable? Are they competent? Are they bright enough? Do they work hard? Vote for me because I can't finish a sentence. No, I would love to have your vote because I want to go and work hard and try to make life better for us.
Okay, so that concludes the debate. The 5 announced candidates again are Josh Aldrich, Daniel Nato, and Shane Rhodes. They were not here. Linda Collins and Ms. Fagard here with us today. Students, please make sure that you're getting your current events, your community service, and the Voice of Democracy Scholarship done by next week. Thank you for viewing.
All right.